2 words. That is all Donald Trump needed this morning to tell the world how he intends to respond to the Supreme Court ruling that his tariffs were illegal. Absolute right. Not careful legal analysis, not a measured response to the court's findings, not a plan to work inside the constitutional boundaries the founders established. Absolute right. 2 words posted in the middle of the night that told Canada, told the courts, and told every allied nation watching this confrontation exactly what the president wants everyone to believe comes next. And Mark Carney had the response ready before Washington finished reading the reactions. If you want news updates like this first, subscribe to Capture Brief within the next minute, so you don't miss the next ruling, the next escalation, or the next sudden shift as it breaks. Let me tell you what many people covering this story are not stopping long enough to explain clearly. What happened last night between Donald Trump and the Supreme Court of the United States is not simply a legal development in a trade dispute. It is a constitutional moment. A moment when the president of the most powerful nation on earth looked at the highest judicial authority his own country possesses, the institution designed to check executive overreach, and publicly dismissed it as inept, embarrassing, and insufficiently loyal, while signaling he intends to do what he wants anyway. That is not a trade policy statement. That is a statement about whether legal constraints apply to this president at all. And every government watching, including Canada's, is now making decisions based on the answer to that question. Because a president who waves off Supreme Court rulings at midnight on social media is not a president whose next move is constrained by what the court said. He is a president whose next move is constrained by what he believes he can get away with. Carney understands this. Ottawa has been preparing for this version of this confrontation since the first week of this trade war. And what Canada hit back with today was not simply a response to 2 words posted in the middle of the night. It was the activation of a legal, diplomatic, and economic strategy built specifically for the moment the American constitutional framework stopped functioning as a predictable constraint. In February, the Supreme Court ruled that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the legal authority the Trump administration had been using to impose broad tariffs on countries around the world, including Canada, did not provide legal justification for those measures. The 1977 law was designed to address genuine national security emergencies involving hostile foreign actors. The court found that applying it to impose sweeping tariffs on allied democratic trading partners exceeded the statutory authority Congress had granted. The ruling was not a narrow technicality. It was a fundamental determination that an emergency power had been used for a purpose the law did not authorize. It vacated tariff measures that had become the administration's primary instrument of trade enforcement for months. And it did something legal scholars immediately flagged as bigger than trade. It signaled the court is willing to enforce limits on presidential emergency economic powers. Now here's the key. The administration's response to that ruling revealed more about its governing philosophy than any trade policy paper it has issued. Trump called the court completely inept and embarrassing. He accused it of harming the country. He suggested it failed to show him sufficient loyalty. And then he claimed he has the absolute right to impose new tariffs through other legal mechanisms. He even suggested in his overnight posts that the court's ruling confirmed the absolute right. And here is the critical detail every person watching needs to understand. The Supreme Court ruling, as written, did not confirm an absolute right to impose tariffs in any form the president chooses. It ruled that the specific authority being used was improperly applied. It did not hand the president an unlimited alternative pathway. So Trump's characterization was not legal interpretation. It was political messaging designed at midnight to project strength in the face of a legal defeat. And here's that reminder again, about 2 minutes after the first mention. If you want updates like this first, subscribe to Capture Brief and turn on notifications, because the next move in this story can drop overnight and reshape the entire day. Understanding what comes next requires understanding the legal landscape, the ruling created for the administration. The primary emergency tariff authority is gone. The administration moved quickly to impose broad 10% tariffs under a different statute, Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act. But Section 122 tariffs expire after 150 days. They run out in July. The president has talked about raising them to 15%, but the bigger issue is structural. They are temporary by design. Meanwhile, US officials have launched a new string of trade investigations meant to build a bridge to longer-term tariff authorities under other laws. But investigations take time. They have procedural requirements. They can be challenged, and they do not provide the same instant sweeping coverage the emergency authority delivered before the court struck it down. What the administration is trying to do now is reconstruct in a matter of weeks a trade enforcement architecture that took months to assemble the first time, using backup legal mechanisms that come with their own timelines, constraints, and vulnerabilities on a clock that runs out in July, against opponents who have spent months studying every available US tariff statute and building strategies to challenge each one. Canada is the most prepared of those opponents, and the 150-day window created by Section 122 is a window Ottawa has been analysing and planning around since the Supreme Court challenge was first filed. At 11:43 this morning, Mark Carney appeared before reporters in Ottawa. His team had been tracking the court decision, the administration's alternative authorities, and the political temperature in Washington for months. What he delivered today was not a reaction. It was the activation of a strategy built for the exact legal and constitutional scenario that last night's posts confirmed is now the operating reality. Carney began by addressing the Supreme Court ruling directly, in terms ordinary people could follow. He said the highest court in the United States ruled that tariffs imposed on Canada exceeded the legal authority Congress granted to the American president. He said the ruling matters not because Canada needs an American court to validate Canada's position. Canada's position, he argued, has been consistent throughout, but because it confirms what Canada has said from the beginning. The pressure campaign was not built on solid legal foundations. It was built on an aggressive interpretation of emergency powers that the American constitutional system has now rejected. Then Carney addressed the absolute right claim with the precision of someone who has spent his career inside institutions where the difference between legal authority and political assertion can move markets and reshape governments. There is no absolute right in a constitutional democracy, Carney said, in essence. There are statutory powers granted by legislatures. There are constitutional boundaries enforced by courts. There are treaty obligations accepted by governments. And there are the rights of sovereign nations to defend their interests through legitimate mechanisms. Canada, he said, respects those frameworks. Canada has operated within them, and Canada will use every one of them to defend itself against every new tariff measure the administration pursues through whatever legal vehicle it chooses next. Then he announced 3 immediate actions, 3 moves that together form Canada's strategic response to the new legal landscape. First, Carney announced the expansion of Canada's legal challenge portfolio. Canada has been pursuing international disputes through the WTO system, bilateral panels, and other forums. Carney said Canada is adding a formal submission to the international legal record, documenting the Supreme Court ruling and what it implies about the legal justification for the tariff campaign. The argument is straightforward. If the American court found emergency economic powers were misapplied to allied partners, that strengthens the legal foundation for international findings against measures that relied on the same theory. Canada is using the American court's ruling as a tool in international litigation. Second, Carney announced activation of what he called Canada's Legal Transition Response Framework. This is a set of pre-prepared economic and trade adjustments designed for the period when American tariff authority is shifting from an invalidated emergency power to whatever alternative mechanisms Washington tries to assemble. Carney described accelerated export redirection agreements, accelerated domestic production investment programs, and intensified engagement with allied trading partners to lock in commercial relationships during the window of US tariff uncertainty. The logic is deliberate. The 150-day window before Section 122 expires is a window of comparative American trade enforcement weakness. Canada intends to use every day of it to advance structural diversification. Third, Carney announced formal communication to Canada's allied economic coordination partners, what officials have described as a resilience network, informing them of the legal timeline, the July expiration risk, and Canada's assessment of how Washington is likely to rebuild tariff authority through investigations and possible national security mechanisms. Carney invited partner governments to coordinate legal and economic responses so the administration faces consistent, well-documented opposition across every mechanism it attempts to use. Now here is the analysis Washington does not want you to dwell on: those midnight posts, the absolute right claim, and the attack on the court tell you something about the state of this trade confrontation, if you know how to read them. Governments that are winning trade confrontations do not attack their own Supreme Courts at midnight. They do not need to claim absolute rights immediately after a court decision narrowed executive authority. They do not scramble to rebuild enforcement architecture through temporary tools on expiring timelines. They prosecute strategy from a position of legal confidence, institutional stability, and strategic momentum. None of those describe the administration's position this morning. What those posts look like is a president absorbing a significant legal defeat, recognizing it created a window of weakness in trade enforcement capability, and responding by projecting aggressive confidence, because confidence is the one tool that can be deployed instantly without any legal foundation at all. The posts were not a legal strategy. They were a messaging strategy, meant to prevent the perception of weakness from becoming operational weakness before the administration can rebuild its legal footing. Carney read it that way immediately, and Ottawa's actions today are designed to exploit the gap between what Trump asserted at midnight and what the legal landscape supports in the morning. The 150-day clock is running. The investigations launched last week take months, not days, to produce durable authorities. National security tariffs require findings and processes that can be challenged. Every vehicle the administration has available carries timelines and vulnerabilities that did not exist when the emergency authority was intact. Canada has studied every one of them. Ottawa has challenged strategies drafted for every one of them. And the commercial and diplomatic relationships Canada has been building are being locked in now during the window of enforcement weakness, before Washington rebuilds what the court just took apart. So here are 3 scenarios from here. Scenario 1, the administration's new investigations produce national security findings within roughly 60 days, allowing new longer-term tariffs through a mechanism that has historically survived many challenges. Canada contests the justification in every available domestic and international forum at once. The legal fight stretches 12 to 18 months. Canada continues diversifying through the uncertainty. And by the time final legal outcomes arrive, Canada's structural trade shifts have reduced the leverage tariffs can exert compared to the start of the confrontation. Scenario 2. The 150-day Section 122 window expires before Washington constructs a replacement framework with comparable coverage. Tariff pressure drops materially. That creates space for diplomatic engagement. Canada's coordination with partners and its accelerated commercial locking produce durable diversification during the gap. Negotiations begin from a reality where Canada's resilience has increased and Washington's legal posture has weakened. A deal becomes more favorable to Canadian interests than the original pressure campaign was designed to achieve. Scenario 3. Trump's attacks on the Supreme Court and the absolute right posture accelerate a wider constitutional crisis inside the United States that extends beyond trade. Members of Congress, watching the administration's relationship with constitutional constraints, begin organizing oversight and legislative responses. International partners draw conclusions about U.S. institutional reliability that affect investment and alliances, not just tariffs. Canada, having strengthened independent resilience throughout the conflict, becomes a stable partner at the precise moment American institutional stability is most in question. The trade war Canada has been surviving becomes the foundation for a major expansion of Canadian international partnerships. End assertion, not adjustment and compliance. And they told the world the president believes projecting confidence at midnight can substitute for the legal foundation the court just removed,